Venice, California, which, along with the southern part of Santa Monica, is arguably the birthplace of modern skateboarding. Now, whether or not people were skating in New York, Chicago, Boston, Houston, San Francisco, Portland, or Nice, France, is kind of irrelevant because the most convincing images and the most radical footage all came out of this part of Southern California. And this ragged, rundown part of where the ocean meets the city was essentially where modern skateboarding was born. And I've always been curious as to what these things are, and I guess probably some of you already know, but these are barbecue pits. These are the chimneys for what would have been a barbecue grill right here, and right there. And this was part of this original design for the Venice Pavilion in 1961 by the firm Vernon Duckett and Associates. And the idea was basically in the early 1960s that run-down and neglected parts of American cities would get these great public spaces where they hoped that families would come and enjoy leisure and enjoy their time at the beach, but they needed facilities. The beach wasn't enough. And Vernon Duckett offered all of these amenities in this 1961 design. There were the barbecue pits, there was seating, there was picnic tables, there was a stage, there was the space for a performance. I mean, if you think about these concrete spots that were built within that decade between 1961, when the Venice Pavilion was built, and 1971, when the Embarcadero Plaza was built, all of these spaces were built in concrete, not stone, not steel, not stucco, because concrete was durable and cheap. And they offered open space, open-ended activity. And just to the east of this pavilion, you have those like retaining walls that were built in 1971 to combat erosion. That's when you start to see people dragging wooden quarter pipes up to the front of those walls. Aaron Murray doing the most epic frontside wall ride imaginable. Christian Hosoi catching major air. Tim Jackson skating his own insanely awesome way on those walls. A certain style of aggressive and stylish street skating emerged in Venice Beach in the 1980s, and it came directly out of this unforgiving concrete environment. All of these spaces ended up being kind of neglected by the communities that were supposed to use them and adapted and reinterpreted by skateboarders. And the other draw of these spaces for skateboarders was they kind of failed as public spaces for other people.
Tonight after graffiti was painted over by an anti-gang group. The graffiti, which covered an area known as the Pit, was considered by many as artwork.
So by the mid-1990s, this empty graffiti-covered pavilion became a destination for some of the best skateboarders in the area and eventually the world. I mean, this is when you start to see like Tim Dowling's Listen video, like Chris Franzen, Chris Roberts, Robbie McKinley, Guy Mariano's Switch Pop Shove It, Switch Crooks across the whole bench. I mean, one of the appeals of this spot is you had these high circular picnic tables and you had this row of benches with sand gaps where palm trees once were in the middle. It was like the perfect street spot for 90s skateboarding. And I pointed this out elsewhere, but there weren't really a lot of concrete or granite plazas in Los Angeles because this is a city of such immense suburban sprawl that really you associate a lot of LA skateboarding with like curb cuts, sidewalks, and asphalt schoolyards and picnic tables. But the Venice Pavilion offered a densely packed, semi-urban concrete environment of sick double-sided benches, high tables, and even a rooftop gap. And around the turn of the millennium, 99, 2000, the city of Venice destroyed this plaza, ripped out the tables, ripped out the benches, tore down the pavilion, and filled the entire thing with sand. So it's a little bit heartbreakingly ironic that this once lawless and illicit pit where you had graffiti and gang activity and radical ledge tech wizardry is now filled in with sands. But luckily, one of the most iconic, enduring, and popular skate spots in the world, the Santa Monica Sand Gaps, are skating distance away. And we're now a mile up from the Venice Pavilion at a spot that's popularly known as the Sand Gaps, for you can see why. These sand gaps where palm trees normally are, that after you like ollie these concrete chess piece like bollards, you might do a trick over the sand gaps, you might do another trick over the second sand gap, and then you might get a ledge trick on the benches over in that corner over there. And those bollards, the palm trees, and these ledges were all installed between about 1985 to 1987 under the designs of a firm called Campbell & Campbell. And they redesigned this plaza along the waterfront at a time when this neighborhood was changing from being a fairly like low income neighborhood of artists, surfers, and gangsters to a fairly affluent, gentrified beachfront neighborhood of yuppies. You can really see the changes in Santa Monica in two sets of buildings over here. You have these 1960s high-rises that were built to house as many people as possible at a time when residency in this area was pretty low, and compare that to the 1980s condominiums that are right next to it. The high-rises get as many people in there, the condominiums are individual private property for each person. And it just so happened, it's a perfect coincidence, that Natas Kopis was single-handedly redefining what was possible on a skateboard by simply skating what was just out front of his front door. And it just so happens that these bench height concrete ledges and these double-sided curbs were the thing that he skated most, which make these sort of twinky, rounded, double-sided curbs probably some of the oldest and most famous, most iconic double-sided curbs in the world. I mean, if it weren't for what Natas did in the late 1980s and Wheels of Fire and Streets of Fire and Risk It and Sick Boys, we probably wouldn't be skating these double-sided curbs today. And to give you a sense of like how groundbreaking Natas's skating was in the late 80s, I mean, not only is he ollieing up full-size picnic tables and doing the first bionic wall rides ever seen, but he also does a frontside 360 off of this bench. 1987, that is mind-blowing. And it's a tiny little detail, and it really doesn't matter to most skateboarders, but the reason why these benches are here is to keep sand from blowing onto the boardwalk. And you see that little scallop side? There's about a century of infrastructural design behind that particular shape. In 1900, there was a catastrophic hurricane in Galveston, Texas that killed over 6,000 people, and they erected these reinforced concrete walls with the same kind of scalloped wall facing the ocean. That same design will be what Ocean Beach in San Francisco copies, and that also was the exact same design that Don Carter, who worked with Lawrence Halprin, quoted when he was doing those wave walls that once faced Embarcadero Plaza. The giant quarter pipes that face Lake Michigan and Chicago, Illinois, that all comes from the same place. But here, these are bench heights. You know, Santa Monica doesn't get a lot of like hurricanes or floods. So for the most part, all you need is about a 15-inch high like bench keeping the sand off of the boardwalk. But these street lights and even the lips on the benches, this is kind of like 1980s postmodernism. You know, similar to Pier 7, the way in which that pier was rebuilt to look like it belonged in the Victorian period. Here you have these concrete fluted column-like streetlights, and even these benches don't necessarily need these bull-nosed lips. So actually what makes this spot such a fun and challenging skate spot is because like in the 1980s, there was a desire to make even the most basic concrete infrastructure look old-timey. I think my favorite photo is of Eric Pupecki doing a Pupecki grind, a backside 180 to fakie 5-0 on this ledge, probably from like 1996 or something like that. And in that photo, you see that concrete can, but that can is over there, and there's a patch of grass where this double-sided curb is there. That's the curb where Natas does the hurricane. You couldn't really skate this as a double-sided curb. This was simply just a square curb that separated a patch of grass from the bike lanes. Now this is probably the most popular part of this spot. And these ledges, because the ground was smooth, these were the most heavily skated ledges. Not only are they the closest to the sand gaps, but you have this kind of perpendicular bench right there where you can do a trick over that bench after doing a trick on this ledge, or maybe a trick over the bench before doing a trick on this ledge. You know, these ledges have always been relatively high. They've always been rounded with this like weird concrete coping. There's always been sand here. The appeal of this spot has always been that you can skate here all day. Not only is it the last spot that you could possibly skate before you hit the beach in the Pacific Ocean, it's also the most consistent spot that you can skate every day if you get kicked out of anywhere else or if you don't want to go on a mission and sit in your car for 2 hours. And it doesn't hurt that this is one of these spots that first showed street skating at its most powerful and radical. Through the footage of people like Natas Kopis and Eric Dressen and Jeff Hartzell and everyone that skated here in the late 80s and early 90s, all of the stuff that like Tim Gavin and Henry Sanchez and everyone else who skated these double-sided curbs was able to do at this place cements this as a world-class destination. This is one of the most, if not the most, iconic concrete skate spots that people can still skate today. And we're now at the northernmost beachfront skate spot that I think anyone really cares about. One of the things I want to point out is that this is one of the gnarliest and worst run-ups for any giant concrete triple set that I've ever seen. Not that I've seen that many. But you've got to navigate this hellish pattern of diagonal planks. And then once you reach concrete, you've got a bondoed crack, you've got a grate, you've got a drain, and you've got a pretty narrow landing to make it to the bottom of the triple set and not hit that super corny and kitsch lantern right there. Kareem Campbell set it off. Of course, I'm going to remember that. Arto Sari switch flipped it. I'm not going to list all the tricks, but this is an epic spot. I think great skate spots are often defined by not just what they offer, but what they don't offer. A smooth landing, an easy way to get there. Santa Monica triple set doesn't have any of these things, and that's probably what makes it super legendary. I think one of the coolest things about just thinking about this 2-mile stretch of skate spots along the waterfront here is that you kind of go from the earliest roots of modern skateboarding on Venice Beach to the wall ride and jump ramp era of the late 80s to the double-sided curb and ledge era of the 90s to this like triple set that is just eternally gnarly. Almost everything you would want to skate in concrete can be found in 2 miles between Santa Monica and Venice.
I want this cat. It's an even trade.